Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. I'd like to thank you all for joining us here for the webinar about Progress Corticon for Sitefinity Digital Agency Partners. We have a very good event. This is a topic of high interest among the digital agency community. So we're excited to see everyone on and to have some of the Corticon folks share some information about this very, very interesting product, and we think it's something that will fold in very well with the offerings that you bring to your customers. So I'm happy to introduce Ankur Goyal, who's a product manager for Progress Corticon, and Kevin Foster, the product marketing manager for Progress Corticon. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Kevin, and Kevin, I'll be moving the slides for you, so just let me know when you want me to advance, okay?
Sounds good. First of all, thank you and welcome to everyone who's showing up today. We're going to make this as interactive as possible because we'll just show you a few slides here and there, but then we really want to actually encourage discussion to see exactly the applicability for Corticon into your environment. So if you go ahead and go to the first slide, and the next slide. I'm starting this one with the fact that no matter what application you're utilizing, everything is going to be governed by a decision. And every decision that you actually have is governed by business rules. So as you can see here, the decision is as simple as should we pay this claim, or what dosage am I going to give out? Should a patient be discharged? All of those are basically have a rule that actually determines what the answer should be, whether it's yes or no. So for example, for paying the claim, if it has an invalid billing code, we have to reject it. What dosage should I give? A kid under the age of 6 is not eligible for a product. Or last but not least, if a patient's supposed to be discharged, has the final blood work come in to basically prove that he is ready to go. So these are all basically done right now. So if we go to the next slide, what you'll see is that the problem with rules are very seldom are they ever static. Especially if you look into different industries, what happens is that they may have to not only be changed, but they need to be changed frequently. If you think about things such as healthcare or financial services, where you're dealing with regulatory things like HIPAA or Sarbanes-Oxley here in the U.S., competitive pressures. If you think about the airlines dealing with a fare war, or your competitor just came out with a new offering, and unfortunately, we still have a lot of security hacks that are going on there. Rules are consistently being made. Now, as you can look on the right-hand side, it just talks about what are some of those other impactors. Whether it's regulations, policies, consumer behavior, all these things are going to make you have to make adjustments to the rules. Now, those rules exist today. However, those rules most of the time are actually hard-coded into your application. Now, if I think about that, if you have to go through and change some rules, whether it's basically 1 line of code or 100 lines of code, that can be very cumbersome and time-consuming. In fact, sometimes it actually looks like you have to do an entire software development lifecycle just to go through and to update this accordingly. If an IT organization is no longer able to actually spend the time spending so much time making these, well, I would say, simple task changes, it really truly leads to them not being able to kind of innovate on the new and the best things. And as you can hear from if you read the news headlines, you see that if you make a misstep, it can cost you in so many different ways. Whether it's going to be your reputation is damaged, whether there may be a financial penalty, or you actually may lose customers. All of those are reasons why organizations are now looking for better ways to do their change management. So the next slide is, we felt that from a Corticon perspective, and so to validate us, we actually went out and actually surveyed IT professionals through an organization called Application Development Trends. And when we did the survey, it turns out that the #1 priority that they had was actually how to deal with their change requirements. And more importantly, they were 62%, a majority, were actually unhappy with their current change management methodologies. I'm not going to read the slide to you. I'm assuming you'll get these a little bit later. But the key thing is, if you look down to the top 3 goals that they had for last year, it was to lower the IT implementation costs, to develop your policies and rules faster, and last but not least, you want to reduce your turnaround time for the change request. So if you go to the next slide, The problem is this. We recognize that these rules exist and that they currently are being hard-coded. But like I mentioned earlier, traditional methodologies are not actually helping us out that much because it basically can not only be very difficult to automate, at times it actually may be impossible to automate. And that when you do that, the impact of that, it can take you a long time to actually not only do it, but it can be very costly in terms of not only the amount of money it takes to go through and spend to do that whole software development life cycle, but also the amount of money that you're going to lose by not being able to innovate and work on new things. Think about your own environment. What if you basically stayed static for the next 2 years? What have you actually missed out on? And so one of the things that we'll talk about next is Corticon being a better way. And I want to hand that off to Arthur.
Thanks, Kevin. So one of the things that I want all of you to understand from the rules perspective is we're not talking about very simple, very basic, or very basic rules, or the rules that you have that are available in Sitefinity in some form or fashion for visibility, for permissions. These are very simple, very basic rules, and a lot of these applications provide a good way to handle these rules. The rules, the decisions that we're talking about are really complex, volatile business logic, the logic that really makes businesses unique and how they function. That's the kind of business logic that we're talking about. And really what Corticon does is provides you a capability to externalize that logic. All of that logic today, Corticon isn't something that's bringing a new way of, is bringing a new technology in the market for which there's no solution yet. Today, every company writes logic in the form of code, and that's where all the problems lie. So what Corticon is providing you a way to separate that decision logic from your application code and put that logic in a system that's specifically designed to manage your rules. The other benefit that Corticon provides is, if you think about your business, if you think about the business logic, typically the people that understand the business logic are subject matter experts, are domain experts. These are the people who understand the business and to a certain extent understand technology as well. So really what we're doing with Corticon is giving you a system so that these kind of people, these subject matter experts, can actually use the tool to not only maintain the logic, but to test the logic to make sure the logic is complete, doesn't have any problems, any issues with what's being described. And that's really something that these subject matter experts can't do with the way logic is written today. If you're writing logic in the form of code, it's very difficult to figure out what actually code was written and what problems that code might have. Not only that, but once you've written that logic, you can actually execute that logic as any open standard. So you can make a call to Corticon using standard web services protocols like REST and SOAP and JSON, or if you wanted to, you can actually execute it in process as well. So you're really ensuring performance and scalability when you're using this kind of a system. One more build out, Mike. And that's really the key, that now that you're providing all these kinds of tools and features within the product, you're making sure that anytime you have to come back to make changes to a rule, you can make them quickly. The logic is very transparent. You can make it safely and ensure that only the change that was intended has happened and you're not breaking any line of code further down in your application. Next slide. So why use Corticon? Why use this method? Does it make sense? you know, the single biggest question we get asked from customers is, I already do this. I do this in the form of code. So help me understand why I should not do it in the form of code. And that's what we'll answer. That's what we want you guys to understand. One of the big differentiation factors of Corticon is model-driven development. And sometimes it's really easy to understand what we mean by model-driven development by understanding what it's not. What we're not talking about model-driven is writing lines and writing logic in the form of code. Doing that is procedural. That's not model-driven. That's a procedural line of procedural way of writing your business logic, where not only do you have to figure out whether the logic, whether the code that you're writing is correct or not, but you also have to write it in the way you want that code to be executed. So you have to figure out the sequence of execution. Corticon provides that provides an alternate to doing that. We're truly model-driven in the sense that anything that you're modeling in Corticon is actually what you're seeing, what's being represented, and what's going to get executed. The other advantage, and I'll go into each one in more detail in the next few slides, but the second differentiating factor for Corticon, and Mike, you can build these out, is the rules integrity piece, which is how do you make sure that the logic that you're writing is complete, doesn't have any logical loops, doesn't have any ambiguities. That's really what Corticon provides, and that's also something that you cannot do at all when you're writing these in the form of code. The third piece of advantage that Corticon really provides is the way in the back end the algorithm has been written, the way it looks at rules, the way it decides to execute the rules. That's also the reason why it scales and performs to the level that it does. So you're looking at a high volume of transactions, a lot of processing capability that Corticon can really provide with response in milliseconds. So let's drill down into each one and look at the next slide. So what do we mean by model-driven rules development? This is a screenshot of our interface. And what we wanted to focus on in this piece is to tell you what the interface actually represents. So there are a lot of things that are happening. One of the biggest things you're going to see by just looking at the interface is you see a lot of rows and columns. One of the reasons why we built that is because we wanted to mirror the interface to an Excel spreadsheet. Why is that the case? Because if you really look at, go back to my previous point about subject matter experts, domain experts, what is the tool that they most often use? The tool that they most often use is Excel. And we wanted to make sure that those very same people that understand the business, that maintain the logic, can actually use a tool in that same form and fashion with a very low learning curve to just go ahead and quickly start adopting this product. The other benefit of using this approach, using this interface, is the fact that we're not asking anyone to learn a new language, learn a new tool set that people most often use. So there's no programming involved whatsoever when it comes to modeling your rules. So to us, to a Corticon team, as a product, it really doesn't matter who the user is. Whether you're a business person that's using it, whether you're an IT developer that's using it, to us, it doesn't matter. What matters is that in order to use the product, there's really no programming involved, no learning specific languages involved. And once you model these rules, the other benefit that you're actually seeing is everything that you're seeing here is modeled using simple English statements, simple English language. The benefit is one of the problems with the way you do things today when you write code, when you write logic in the form of code, is that code can only be understood by the person that's written the code. And you can provide all kinds of best practices to put comments for each line of code that you're writing, but it really doesn't happen. In the end, the person who's written the code cannot write it in a way that any other person can understand. Well, here, when you follow this model-driven rules development approach, any person that has no idea about programming, about Java or .NET or JavaScript or whatsoever, can look at this and understand what is being written. So if you build this out, Mike, the benefit of using this approach is that this interface for the past 15 years that we've been in existence has been really proven to solve the most sophisticated business problems. We haven't really come across any problem that we've not been able to solve using this model-driven rules development approach. So if you go on to the next slide, why is this really important, right? We created this Excel spreadsheet-like metaphor where you can model the rules. So in order to understand why this is important, let's look at the traditional way of doing things. Let's say you're writing logic in the form of code. This is a typical software development cycle. Specifications is something you get from the business for whatever you're trying to build, the requirements. Once you get the specifications, you start working on a design pattern, create some templates, and start coding. Once you've done that, you go into a testing phase. And once you've tested it, you're now looking at integrating with any other application that you're trying to use with that solution, and finally you deploy it. Right? In this entire development approach, the only two phases where you're actually involving a business person is this specification and that template piece. Everything else is being done by a developer. So, Mike, if you build this out, the benefit of using this model-driven approach is that the first 4 phases of building any kind of logic set all get reduced into a single phase, which is the modeling phase for Corticon. You specify the requirements, you design the requirements, you model the requirements, and you test the requirements all in that single suite that you just saw, single interface that you just saw with Corticon. You're doing all of that at the same time. And this is what really reduces the development and change cycle time by 90%. All that's left once you've modeled is for you to integrate Corticon with all the other applications that you want to use it with, and finally deploy. Next slide, Mike. Now, here's a example, some hard data points of why this approach really works. We had a customer, NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, that was using Corticon, and for a brief time, they were at a point where the rules that they were writing in Corticon also had to be written in the application code that they were writing, so they could really do an apples-to-apples comparison. And what they said was, if you look at the initial development approach, for a person that's never really coded anything, and a person that's never used Corticon before, there's a 10 times improvement in how much time it takes for those people to write that exact same rule in the form of code versus Corticon. Even greater is when it comes to changing a rule. So for a person to go into the code, figure out what's the exact rule that needs to be changed, test that rule, make sure that the change that you've made will only impact that single rule that you intended to change and will not impact anything or break the code, versus changing that in Corticon, there's a 25 times improvement. And this is real data points from an actual customer that's using Corticon doing an apples-to-apples comparison. So it's a automation of a single decision-making task, and these are big, hard-hitting numbers. Next slide, Mike. So the second benefit that we were talking about, guaranteed rules integrity. When you're writing code, in almost every language, you've got these great debugging capabilities. But this debugging capability is a real issue when you're writing rules in the form of code. If you look at the development life cycle, when you're writing code, that's typically being done by developers. And whatever code they're writing, that's coming off of the requirements that was given by a business person. As a developer, you never go back to a business person and say, hey, maybe the requirement that you gave me is incomplete, or maybe you forgot a specific scenario. What am I supposed to do when that scenario comes up? Corticon, at the time you're modeling your rules, identifies a lot of issues with the rules that you're writing. Do those rules have any logical errors? Do those rules have any ambiguities? Are they complete or not? Do they have any logical loops or not? So that irrespective of who's modeling the rules, if there's any problem, you can go back to the business person and say, hey, this is what Corticon is saying. Is this a case that's ever going to happen? Or do you really want me to do something when we encounter those cases? And what happens is, in a traditional development approach, most of those errors are introduced in the requirements phase. If you build it out, those errors do not get detected unless you reach the testing phase. That's when you've handed it off to the testing team and they're going and testing the cases. And if you encounter an error, a lot of times the testing team goes back to the developers and the developers make changes to the rules. But in a lot of cases, the developer says, there is no problem. It's not an error. I actually modeled what the requirement was. You're testing, you're creating a case that's not part of the requirement, so it's not my problem. Now, that's most likely what's going to happen. However, if you don't detect errors in that testing phase, we actually sort of overstated. We used to think we were overstating the fact when we say, well, if you're not detecting most of the errors and you deploy things in production, you're going to be out of business, right? Now, you might think that's an overstatement, but if you look at a lot of healthcare exchange implementations, the Obamacare implementations in a lot of states, the states have sued a lot of these system integrators. They've spent millions of dollars trying to work this way in, and they're still nowhere close to getting the system right. When you use Corticon with this approach, everything boils down to the requirements phase. As you're modeling your rules, you're looking at the errors, you're testing those errors, you're fixing those, and you're making sure that when it reaches the actual system integration testing phase, at least the rules portion doesn't have any issues. That's where guaranteed rules and integrity really comes in hand. The third benefit of Corticon was what we talked about, performance and scalability. So Mike, that's the next slide, is the difference in our engine, the backend algorithm. Now, traditionally, rule engines have always worked on an algorithm called READY, which stands for a Latin word for node. And what that algorithm typically does is, at runtime, when you want to execute the rules, this algorithm looks at the data and tries to do some pattern matching, some inferencing logic to figure out what's the sequence of execution in which I should execute the rules. And that's fine as long as you have a small data set. When you send a lot of data to be processed in order to make that decision, this algorithm breaks apart and says, look, you're sending me too much data. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start executing these rules sequentially. And that's where this problem called the greedy wall really gets highlighted, because then the algorithm breaks apart and you're looking at really, really low performance and scalability from this algorithm. Corticon, on the other hand, is based on a patented algorithm called DD, which stands for design time. So if you go back to the model-driven rules development approach, when you're modeling your rules, Corticon in the background is trying to figure out what's the right sequence of execution of the rules that you modeled. So as a rule modeler, your only job is to focus on making the rules correct, modeling the rules that should be modeled. Corticon is going to do the rest. And the benefit of doing that is, at runtime, Corticon already has the sequence of execution for the rules. So anytime, it doesn't really matter whether you send it, 1 kilobyte file of data or 1 megabyte file of data to get processed, Corticon just goes on performing exponentially. It's not a exponential performance that you're going to get similar to Reedy. It's a very linear performance. So if you send it, if you need 2 times the performance that you're looking for, just add twice the processing capability. That's it. Now let's give you some examples of the cases where Corticon has been used so that you can understand what's sort of the right use case of using this. Rules Engine and Corticon specifically is a really horizontal solution. It's not designed for one specific function or vertical, but any vertical, any use case that's using logic and rules that are constantly changing, that are high in number, that are really complex, that's the good use for Corticon. So whether it be an insurance use case for underwriting and processing claims, or whether it be financial services to figure out what kind of mortgages can you apply for, or what kind of loans can I offer you. In the federal government space, FBI uses Corticon as an example to figure out which is the right team that needs to work on the investigation for this applicant if he's applying for a federal job. Health and Human Services, a lot of Medicare, Medicaid implementations, and e-commerce. So let's drill down into a couple different use cases that you can understand how these are being used. California Association of Realtors, as the name suggests, it's a Realtors Association in California. They were really in a problem phase where, how anytime you're applying, you want to buy any real estate, each real estate, depending on so many different characteristics, has all kinds of forms that need to be filled out. So if you're buying a really old property which might have, lead paint or asbestos, you might need to get a form filled out for those. And the real estate agents did not have all of that information in their minds when they're working with their prospects. So what California Association of Realtors had was they had a call center manned by real estate attorneys. And anytime real estate agents were working on a deal, they would just pick up the phone, call up this call center, and ask them what are the right forms that need to be filled out based on their specific use case. Now you can imagine how costly that's going to be if you've got real estate attorneys manning your call center. So instead, what these guys did was they created a solution, an online-based solution, and they used a forms advisor solution that leveraged Progress Corticon in the backend. So anytime a real estate agent wants to figure out what are the right set of forms, they go online, they specify certain question and answer based cases where they say, here's the property, here's the year it was built, here's how it's constructed, all of that data gets sent to Corticon, and Corticon says, okay, based on all of this data, here's the list of forms that need to be filled out. Now, one dramatic reduction in legal staff. So now you're ensuring 100% compliance, because it's not just someone telling you, it's actually written on screen, which you can print out, take with you, and make sure all of those 4 forms are signed. Now, this use case didn't have a whole lot of business rules. They had about 450 business rules, but those business rules actually represented 10 to the power 69 potential outcomes of the forms that can be signed. And using that, Corticon does that in about 300 milliseconds. So one of the quotes from the CTO of that organization, Mike, if you build this out, was right here. They got at least a 10-fold improvement in productivity. Not just that, but now they also had reduced their costs significantly, because now you don't need to have a call center manned by real estate attorneys. So here's a really great use case of a solution where Corticon in the backend is driving a lot of your logic, but you have a front-end system, a website that's been built that's really front-facing for the customers who are getting that data. The next use case is an example of a company in Latin America, in Brazil, called VitalBox. What they're doing is they also have an online tool, an online portal that calculates a lot of the changes in your medical conditions. So you as a patient go on, provide a lot of different characteristics, for example, your weight, your heart rate, your blood pressure, those kind of things. And it automatically, all of that data is taken up by Corticon, and Corticon goes through certain rules to figure out whether you're healthy or you need to exercise more, or you log in after a month and you haven't really updated your blood pressure, so it's going to alert you to say, well, we need to make sure you're healthy, so give us your blood pressure. That was sort of the first phase. What they've now also done along with that is to say if you need to get treated for certain conditions, or based on the medical information that you've provided, they can now know if you need to get treated for certain things, and they're trying to build a scheduler so that you can get appointments scheduled through to the doctors, and the doctors can respond and figure out what's wrong with you and what needs to happen. The real benefit which they got out of this was just the time to market. To develop and deploy these rules, it took them just 10 minutes to put a new rule in and make the changes and get it all set. Reduced the development change cycle time by 90%, but look at the scalability, how they grew. They grew from 16,000 to 600,000 people within just a matter of a couple of months. And now you're looking at going in with all kinds of different conditions that people might have. How do you respond to that? How do you test it? How do you write the rules and code? That's really the benefit that these guys got out of using Corticon. Another customer for us is Macintosh, which is a retail group in EMEA. And this is something that I'm sure would be a little bit more of an interest to you from a retail website perspective. These guys want to deliver a cross-channel strategy to enable a seamless customer experience. So across the different channels that people can go and shop for different products, how do you create a cross-channel strategy that provides a very seamless experience across all those channels? And if you flip to the next slide, Mike, this is a real example of the rules that these guys had. And you can yourself imagine, looking at this, how difficult this is going to be if you start writing this in code. And what they're trying to do is create specific product details based on certain categories. For example, if you're in the market for trying to buy new shoes, for example. What you see, the product details on a website are going to be very different based on whether you see it on a laptop, on a mobile device, or on a tablet. Whether on a tablet you need to have much more images than you would on a website. That's the kind of details that they're putting in. So what's the product category? What's the channel? All these kind of details that they're trying to understand. What type of shoe is it? Does it have, wooden soles or leather soles or whatever? That's the kind of thing that they're trying to figure out and say, across the channel, here's what needs to happen. The last example that I want to give you is of a company called Muriel. They're a pet protection and health company, so they provide a lot of medicines for pets. And a lot of these, if you look at their customers, it's not only pet owners. It's just it's veterinary clinics. It's these big farms which are looking after a lot of these animals and working on them. And what they're trying to do is, throughout the year, they run several promotions, several rebates based on how much you're buying and all that. And if you look at the rule, they're on an ongoing basis, they're conducting these promotions. So should I give you a pre-order dollar discount? Should I give you a post-promotion dollar rebate? Should I extend the payment term? Should I give you a price increase protection? Should I give you any extra product per order? Or post-promotion gifts of cash, prizes, or gift cards? All of these kinds of things are being done by Muriel, and all of this is being driven by Corticon. So in their e-commerce world, when any person, entity places an order, when they're running these promotions, this is what they go through. And all these promotions are really, really big for them, because that's what drives a majority of their sale. So for them to make sure they have the right promotion and the promotion's been developed in time so that they can run it when the time comes and not have any issues, and whatever they're placing orders, they get the discounts. This is really where the benefit of Corticon comes in. And really, that's all what we wanted to get to you guys in this session, was just to give you an understanding of what Corticon is and help you understand how Corticon can help you in your business.
All right.
So we're really opening this up for questions, and any question that you have is all game. We're ready to answer any question or any thoughts you might have.
Hey folks, if you want to, it's Mike again. If you'd like to type a question into the question box, you can do that here. We have a few while we wait for folks to put those in. I have one that actually came up a few times. So, Anchor and Kevin, as a digital agency, if I'm talking to a customer, how do I start the conversation about Corticon? What are some things I should be looking for, and how do I really start digging into this and talking about what Corticon can bring to them?
Perfect, and that's a great question, and I think that's a question that I was planning to address by an example, and I forgot to mention it. So I'm glad you asked that. So let me give you an example of an insurance company in New Zealand. They were working with a partner that did both Sitefinity and Corticon, and that insurance company really wanted to build web portals for their customers to go on, make changes to the policies that they have. So this partner pitched Sitefinity, and these guys, the insurance company, really loved Sitefinity. And they loved it so much that they said, at a later phase, I would also want to build out my website for getting new applicants so that they can fill out forms and get policies. And when they said that, this partner said, okay, so this is a simple insurance use case. When you get all those policy applicant data, how are you underwriting the policy? What are the kind of rules that you're using, in which system does those rules exist in? And this company said, well, it's all in the form of code. It's being written in the form of code in an application, and when you apply online, we go through that code and give you that policy. And that's when this partner said, well, have you ever thought of using a rules engine, using Corticon? And that was actually the first time that this insurance company had actually heard of Corticon. And so that's how it began to say, look, if you're an insurance company, we know there are cases like underwriting, claim adjudication, document generation, which have a lot of business rules. So they actually used Sitefinity as a door opener in that company and said, okay, let's have further conversations on how rules can benefit you. So that's, I think, how you as a partner need to view this as. When you're going in, when you're talking to customers about Sitefinity, you're really talking to either the chief marketing person, content creators, content developers. This would just be a door opener. And based on that use case, ask them questions about rules, about business logic, or certain departments and certain functions that handle it, and whether that's a play, whether you can get introduced and ask them much more questions. So things like in the retail example, we gave you a lot of examples in the e-commerce from promotions, rebates, dynamic pricing. Anytime there's a use where you have complex rules, that's when you want to ask this customer that you're working with on how they're handling it and whether you can get a chance to talk about Corticon and rules there.
Great. Thank you very much. Next question, does Corticon offer an API/REST/web service interface to communicate with Sitefinity?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, both Sitefinity and Corticon work within the enterprise architecture using web services. So if Sitefinity needs to make a call to any application, you do that through REST. The way you connect to Corticon, you execute a decision in Corticon is by using a REST service. So both of these products are actually designed to work well within your enterprise. And not just Sitefinity, if you're using any other application, the chosen method of executing and calling Corticon is a web service, and that's either SOAP or REST or JSON.
Thank you. A few follow-up questions that are probably in line with that. Will Corticon become a plugin for Sitefinity as a direct connector? And also, can Corticon be plugged into Windows workflow?
So, like I said, any of these applications can call Corticon using REST, using web services. So whether you're using Workflow Foundation, whether you're using a Pegasystems BPM solution, or any other BPM solution, or any other application, all of them work with Corticon by making a simple REST call or a SOAP call, any web service call. And that's typically how Corticon is called. So it's not a question of whether simple Sitefinity can call it. The question is, can any application call Corticon? And as long as that application supports web services, yes, Corticon would be a good fit.
Great.
So that's how you would call Corticon.
Yeah, so very extensible, and I think you'll see the connections get even tighter because Sitefinity and Corticon are under the Progress umbrella. Good question here. Would Corticon be recommended for an online product configuration builder? A complex product like a build-your-own circuit board with over 1,000 possible components. For example, certain components can and cannot be used with others and affect the performance of the build. Would this be an effective use of Corticon?
Yes, yes. This would. In fact, one of our customers in Germany called Akioma is doing the exact same thing. They're using a combination of different products and Corticon to do the exact same thing. So they're doing this complex building capability online for large manufacturers for a lot of their inventory that they have, and each customer has different rules of how products can be configured, and all of those rules are being driven by Corticon. So the short answer is absolutely.
Great. That actually sounds like an exciting and fun use case. Don't have anything else here. I'll keep an eye out for hands. Does anyone have any additional questions? All right. So with that, I think we'll wrap it up. Anchor, Kevin, anything you'd like to add before I close it out here?
I'll just say one thing from a Sitefinity Corticon perspective. I would say don't go in with an expectation that these two products are going to be very tightly integrated and tightly used with each other in a customer's architecture and solution. Chances are there's always going to be some sort of a middle layer, like an enterprise service bus or a BPM layer between Sitefinity and Corticon. So the question and the use case is not, use Sitefinity and Corticon together. The question is, does this customer have several different functions where they need a Corticon rules engine? So for example, if you're talking to a bank and you're building their web portals, banks have credit cards, banks have loans, have mortgages. Mm-hmm. How are they using rules? What's their process? How much time are they taking to make changes to those requirements, to those rules, and going on? So the question is, like I was saying before, you're talking to any kind of Sitefinity customer. Look at Sitefinity as a door opener. Now that they're in, now that they understand Sitefinity and understand you, take that as an advantage and try to expand and say, this is really key and critical, and this is the benefit it provides. Because like we said, business logic is something that differentiates the business, and that's what you need to pitch them as that differentiating factor. How do you make sure that you continue to be a differentiator and not lag behind the market?
Yeah, that's a great point, Anchor. I think a lot of I know in our conversations with organizations and partners at Next, they wanted to really deepen their relationship with their existing clients. And I think that Corticon's a great way to do that, because clearly there's, as you've outlined here, there's a big need, and there's a big need for both the technology but also the expertise to help get it implemented in a way that makes sense. And the benefits, as you've shown, can be huge, right?
Right.
So really, really excellent stuff. So to the folks on the phone, I want to one quick housekeeping note. We will be doing, in an effort to continue to share other Progress and Telerik technologies with you, we'll have a webinar on the Telerik platform on April 12th. So save the date for that. You'll be receiving information on that shortly. There's a very rich book of portfolio of solutions that are good for your clients here. It's not just Sitefinity, so we're very interested in getting the word out to you about these. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to contact myself or Kevin or Anchor, and this webinar will be recorded. So if you'd like to share it with some of your peers or pass it along, it'd be right here for you. So thank you to Kevin and Anchor. Really great presentation. And thank you to everyone on the phone. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys.